Aaron Weir here again, and on this episode of Vibrant Performance TV, I'll be discussing the cantilever rear suspension that is mounted in the trunk of the turbo rear-wheel drive CRX. I will also briefly review how I fit the fuel tank, prop shaft, and oval exhaust all underneath the car to make this thing rear-wheel drive. I made the rear suspension bolt-in. I want to make this bolt-in so that if I had to remove it and revise it, I could just take a couple of bolts out, pop it out, revise it, bolt it back in. I've seen a suspension similar to this, but it was welded in. That kind of makes a pain in the ass if you need to change something. So I made this all bolt-in. The coilovers are QA1s. This is the third revision of this suspension. Basically, I just started with a straight bar and then had a couple of plates laser cut for the center, welded that all together, and then I just made some rocker arms that have a 1-to-1 ratio. So I'm going to be getting the same ratio on both sides of the rocker arm. One of the biggest reasons why I put the suspension in the trunk is because I just don't have the room in the traditional locations inside the strut towers to place coilovers, because I have control arms there, I have axles. Also, the pickup point was going to be a little bit different on this Nissan rear end compared to where the suspension pickup point is on the control arm on the factory control arm for the CRX. It leans just slightly forward because that pickup point is a little bit further back than where it would normally be on the lower control arm for the CRX. So if you look from here, you can see it's got a slight lean forward, and that's to accommodate that different pickup point, so it keeps it in the proper direction of travel. So now you've had a look at the suspension inside the back of the car. Let's put the car back up and we can have a look at the exhaust system, where I located the fuel tank, and how we fit a prop shaft in there. This is where the factory fuel tank would normally sit. Because I have a drive shaft coming through the middle of it, I needed to remove that tank, and originally I had a tank that sat at the back of the car. So because of the capacity of this tank is so small, I want to increase it. So I'm going to build a second tank that sits in here. And I've taken into account that I was going to do that when I started this tank, and I've added a Vibrant dry brake quick disconnect here. So when I get this new tank installed, I can have an additional line that joins the two on the bottom right there. So I made myself a drive shaft loop. I want to make sure that this fuel line running underneath the drive shaft is going to be protected from the drive shaft. So I made a loop out of some angled stainless. It's not going to come apart. But the drive shaft, the front of the drive shaft is the factory S2000 CV joint, and the rear is the factory S14 U joint. Basically, I just went to a shop that builds drive shafts for large trucks and that sort of thing. I gave them the two ends, said I want it to be this length, I need it to spin at this RPM, I need it to hold this much power. So drive shaft tunnel, it's quite narrow. I could have made it a bit bigger to allow for the exhaust, but I'm going to run the exhaust right underneath it, and it shouldn't be an issue because you're going to get a lot of airflow traveling underneath here. It should keep things cool. So as you can see, if you look down the tunnel, there's obviously no exhaust in the car right now. That was something that I want to address. I need a little more ground clearance, so I'm going to be using some of Vibrant's oval tubing to run down underneath the drive shaft and underneath the transmission. Because I want that added ground clearance, it's going to be 3-inch coming off of the turbo into a 3-inch Jesse catalytic converter, and then off of that I'm going to run it into a transition and run it oval directly underneath the car all the way to the rear diff. Then I'm going to go to another transition back to 3-inch round, and then I'm going to have my muffler sitting at the back of the car. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next episode, where I'm going to be placing turbo inside the engine bay and determining the best placement, and I'm going to have to figure out how to go from the head flange all the way to the collector on a custom turbo manifold.